Hi everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Today's topic is a new FCC report and order that prohibits certain types of revenue sharing and also has a declaration as far as sale-back of leased lines. This would be for service providers working with multi-dwelling units, multi-tenant environments. Again, this is just out now, so we'll be looking at it today. I'll be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Zecorum, Broadband Deployment News. So again, the FCC has just issued a report and order, and this is something that would apply to any broadband service providers that are providing service or thinking about providing service to what they call an MTE or multi-tenant environment. I think of them as MDUs, sometimes multi-dwelling units, but this would apply to both a residential or a business kind of environment. So that's probably what they're calling them, MTEs. So this is what we're looking at today. I'm going to go ahead and go through this so you don't have to. Okay, so I've kind of read through this and we'll cover the highlights if this is something that's of interest to you. So let's take a quick look at it. And as you can see here, if you want to comment during this, join in on the conversation, just feel free to type your comments there. And I will see those, even if it's not up on the screen the whole time. I'll make sure that I see that and maybe we can respond to that. So here's what we're looking at. So as you can see, this is a report and order improving competitive broadband access to multi-tenant environments, adopted February 11th, released February 15th. So I'm going to scroll through lots of this. Certainly we'll not be reading all of this by any means. I'm going to cover the highlights again so you don't have to go through all of this. So first off, just a quick part of the intro. So millions of people work and live in multiple tenant environments, with a third of Americans residing in apartments, condominiums, or other multi-tenant buildings, and MTEs disproportionately serve residents in lower income and marginalized communities. And access to high quality, affordable communication service, including broadband internet access service, has become essential to all Americans, including those living and working in MTEs. So you can see, this kind of goes along with the focus of the federal government on trying to improve broadband service, and they're taking a look at some revenue sharing agreements and some lease line kind of agreements that were in place that are prohibiting that or making that less competitive. So that's what they're trying to address here. To ensure competitive choice of communication services for those living and working in MTEs, and to address practices that undermine long-standing rules promoting competition in MTEs, we take three specific actions. First, we adopt new rules prohibiting providers from entering into certain types of revenue sharing agreements that are used to evade our existing rules. Second, we adopt new rules requiring providers to disclose the existence of exclusive marketing arrangements in simple, easy-to-use language. And third, we clarify that existing commission rules regarding cable inside wiring prohibit so-called sales and leaseback arrangements, which effectively deny access to alternative providers. So they're trying to address things that, they had put in rulings that said you can't limit services to just one provider, but there's some things that have been done that kind of work their ways around that, and that's what they're trying to address right here. And some of that has to do with marketing arrangements. So again, I'm going to scroll through a lot of this. So first, prohibition of certain revenue sharing agreements. To promote broadband competition and deployment in MTEs, we adopt rules prohibiting providers from entering into or enforcing two types of revenue sharing agreements with MTE owners that are particularly harmful and which amount to de facto exclusive access agreements. So again, the exclusive access agreements no longer exist, but these, they're saying, are kind of trying to skirt those rules. So first, we prohibit providers from entering into exclusive revenue sharing agreements with an MTE owner. Second, we prohibit providers from entering into graduated revenue sharing agreements with an MTE owner. So that will be explained down here. Exclusive revenue sharing agreements. In an exclusive revenue sharing agreement, the communications provider offers the MTE owner consideration in return for the provider obtaining access to the building and its tenants, and prohibits the MTE owner from accepting similar consideration from any other provider. Thus, an exclusive revenue sharing agreement allows a communications provider to prevent other providers from sharing payments with the MTE owner. So you're not prohibiting other people from coming in necessarily to use that wiring, but the building owner is, with this revenue sharing agreement, it's exclusive, so others cannot therefore share in that revenue. And the building owner obviously is then not going to be really interested in other providers or not going to be promoting that. So We find that exclusive revenue sharing agreements are anti-competitive and amount to de facto exclusive access agreements. The structure of an exclusive revenue sharing agreement financially disincentivizes the MTE owner from allowing competing providers access to the building and its tenants. Because again, if they're getting revenue from the one and not going to get it from others, they're less inclined to do that. Because each subscriber that switches from the incumbent to a competitive provider decreases the compensation the MTE owner receives, the owner has an incentive to block alternative providers' access to the buildings. That makes sense? So, graduated revenue sharing agreements. This is a little bit different. In a graduated revenue sharing agreement, sometimes known as tiered or success-based agreements, a provider pays an MTE owner a greater percentage of revenue as its penetration in the building increases. Under such an agreement, as a provider serves more tenants in an MTE, the MTE owner receives a greater level of compensation for each tenant. Therefore, the more tenants in an MTE that a provider furnishes service to, the more compensation the MTE owner receives on a pro rata basis. So as this one service provider starts getting more and more subscribers, they're going to be paying that MTE owner more and more money on a per subscriber basis, basically. So again, that's going to limit them in wanting to let others in. We find that graduated revenue sharing agreements are anti-competitive, amount to de facto exclusive access agreements. So again, it's a similar kind of thing. These types of agreements provide an MTE owner with an incentive to exclude competitors so that they can achieve maximum returns under the agreement. So let's see what else we got here. Prohibition of enforcing existing graduated or exclusive revenue sharing agreements. So they're going to talk here about, is this something that can be grandfathered or not? The rules we adopt thus prohibit providers from, number one, executing new graduated or exclusive revenue sharing agreements, and two, enforcing existing graduated or exclusive revenue sharing agreements on a going forward basis. Applying this prohibition to future enforcement of existing agreements will promote competitive entry to MTEs where these agreements are already in effect to the benefit of MTE tenants. So they're trying again to make this as beneficial for those that are living in these apartment buildings or maybe that are leasing space in a business that they have options for broadband providers. And here we go, compliance dates. So for existing contracts with exclusive and graduated revenue sharing agreements, compliance with the prohibition on enforcing such agreements will be required 180 days after publication of this report and order in the Federal Register. We direct the Wireline Competition Bureau to release a public notice announcing the compliance date of the rules for existing contracts. So there were some who had asked for a year, to make that a year, but they felt like 180 days was plenty of time to do that. Required disclosure of exclusive marketing arrangements. So you can still have exclusive marketing arrangements under this situation, but what they're saying is that there are certain disclosures that need to be made. Sorry, I'm looking at something here on my keyboard. We require providers to disclose the existence of exclusive marketing arrangements that they have with MTE owners. Such disclosure must be included on all written marketing material directed at tenants or prospective tenants of an MTE subject to the arrangement and must explain in clear, conspicuous, legible, and visible language that the provider has the right to exclusively market its communication services to tenants in the MTE, that such a right does not suggest that the provider is the only entity that can provide communication services to tenants in the MTE, and that services from an alternative provider may be available. So these would be arrangements where you don't have a single provider. You can have multiple providers, but one in particular has an arrangement where they have kind of a most favored nation status in a sense, not pricing wise, but as far as marketing goes, where they have the sole ability to market to tenants through certain means, obviously not through, everybody who's could be providing service to that apartment complex or whatever it is could certainly send direct mail to people, make phone calls to people, but just through certain avenues, and that they have to disclose that in a clear manner. So an exclusive marketing arrangement is an arrangement either written or in practice between an MTE owner and a service provider that gives the service provider, usually in exchange for some consideration, the exclusive right to certain means of marketing its service to its tenants. As a consolidated, and then, this is basically what they're looking here. They had a request for comment on all of this a long time ago, or some time ago. And people did comment on this, and they do quote some of the comments in here as you look through this document. So it says it's consolidated communications And Ziply Fiber explained, exclusive marketing arrangements give only one broadband provider the right to send sales representatives into an MTE or distribute marketing materials such as door hangers in the property. So you can imagine that. So you've got door hangers or maybe flyers that are out in the lobby, maybe something in the newsletter that gets sent to people about the service provider. All of those could be considered things that are part of that exclusive marketing arrangement. MTE owners will often identify that single company as the preferred provider and steer tenants toward that provider's service. The record reflects that tenants in MTEs with exclusive marketing arrangements are confused about the availability of competitive services in the MTE, and that this confusion dampens competition. So as people are getting these door hangers that say, ABC provider is the provides service to this condominium or this apartment building, then people are kind of confused sometimes. They think that's their only choice. While some commenters argue we should prohibit exclusive marketing arrangements entirely, in this report and order we take this incremental step in light of record developments since the Commission had last considered exclusive marketing arrangements in 2010, and we will continue to monitor the impact of exclusive marketing arrangements on competition in MTEs. So they're taking this step of saying that things need to be disclosed very clearly, seeing if that will reduce the confusion and that will be enough to overcome this, what seems like an anti-competitive landscape. But they do leave the door open here that in the future they may completely eliminate these exclusive marketing agreements. We require that the disclosure meet the following three requirements. It must, number one, be included on all written marketing material from the provider directed at tenants or prospective tenants of the affected MTE. Identify the existence of exclusive marketing arrangement and include a plain language description of the arrangement and what it means. So they have to tell people, hey, this is an exclusive arrangement we have this with this one particular provider, and it must be made in a manner that it is clear, conspicuous, and legible. The term written marketing material includes electronic or print material. Written marketing material as it is directed at a tenant or prospective tenant of an MTE, if it contains specific mention of the MTE, if it's provided directly to the tenant or prospective tenant because of its relationship or prospective relationship to the MTE, again, that might be a newsletter or a door hanger, regardless of the means by which it is provided, including but not limited to being sent via email, regular mail, even mailbox insert, or door hanger. So even if the provider sends this out direct mail, it needs to be disclosed because they do have that relationship. Or number three, given to a third party, including the MTE owner, with the understanding it will be directed at tenants or prospective tenants of the MTE. It does not, however, include general purpose marketing material that incidentally reaches tenants or prospective tenants of the MTE. For example, general area media or online advertising, website promotions, those kinds of things. So I'm not sure about direct mail. If let's say you've got the exclusive marketing arrangement with provider number one, can they send direct mail just through general means? It sounds like they could run a TV commercial. They could certainly send direct mail to all of the people in a particular zip code, and I suppose if that included this MTE unit environment, then maybe that's okay. But anything that's kind of associated, if they have a leg up, let's say being delivered by the MTE itself, or somehow like door hangers, those kinds of things that are going to be part of that relationship, then it sounds like that's excluded. In terms of the language of disclosure, we require that the provider to disclose that it has the right to exclusively market its communication services to tenants in the MTE, that such a right does not mean that the provider is the only entity that can provide such services to the tenants in the MTE, and that service from an alternative provider may be available. They don't have to say who that is or if it is even available. They just could say it may be available. So there may be 2 or 3 providers. They don't have to name them. They just have to say, you may have other options, that we're not the only choice. In terms of the disclosure being clear, conspicuous, and legible, we require that the disclosure be in plain language, easy to read, and as visible as any other business or legal terms in the marketing material being directed to the MTE tenants. Indicia of, or an example, for example, indicia of effective disclosures include using clear and unambiguous language, avoiding small mice type, or small type, sometimes we call that mice type, placing statements placing any qualifying information close to the claim being qualified, and avoiding making inconsistent statements or using distracting elements that could undercut or contradict the disclosure. So don't put this big U's really interesting picture maybe next to the little mice type. What they're talking about there, I don't know. Simple typeface, legible font size, and ample white space would also be indicia of an effective disclosure or an example of an effective disclosure. This obligation applies to all exclusive marketing arrangements, both those that are already in place and those that are agreed to after the effective date of these rules. So they are going to have to, if they've got this material already printed, they're going to have to scrap that. They've got 180-day. There is this thing about, I didn't highlight this, but we will not enforce the compliance with the disclosure requirement for existing exclusive marketing arrangements until the latter of the Office of Management and Budget completing its review of the new requirement pursuant to Paperwork Reduction Act, or 180 days after publication of this report and order in the Federal Register. So what they're saying there is the Office of Management and Budget is going to be looking at this. I guess maybe if there's like tons of door hangers and things that don't have this on there, they're going to have to review that and see about killing all those trees to make new ones. I don't know, but it says the latter date, so I'm assuming that could take longer than 180 days for them to say you need to scrap everything that you've been doing before in your marketing and get new material out there. So what else have we got here? There we go. And then there's this declaratory ruling that is going back and trying to clarify something about inside wiring because there was another little end around there that service providers were doing on what was previously declared in a rule back in 1992, it looks like. So we clarify that Section 76.802J of the Commission's rules prohibits sale and leaseback arrangements. So it wasn't specific in those rules that it prohibited sales and leaseback arrangements. Now they're saying we're declaring that this prior rule, even though we didn't say it prohibited sales and leaseback arrangements, it did. Our clarification is intended to facilitate competitive entry in MTEs, a goal of the 1992 Cable Act that has motivated the Commission's cable inside wiring rules for nearly 3 decades. The Commission adopted that ruling as part of a comprehensive new regulatory scheme to ensure that consumers are informed of their inside wiring rights when they contact their provider to terminate service. To ensure consumer choice with respect to any cable installed by the cable operator within the premises of the subscriber, in the event that the subscriber terminates service from that cable operator. So they want to make sure that, if somebody cancels their service, that they are aware that they, in a sense, that wiring in their unit is something that they have access to. The Commission's purpose was to ensure that subscribers can quickly and easily use the wiring to connect an alternative video programming service, that switching services will not be an onerous process, and that the service will not be disrupted. And I'm sure this would apply to broadband as well now, since broadband can be delivered over the cable that's coming into the end user's apartment. Specifically, the Commission, number 1, prohibited providers from using any ownership interests in property located on the subscriber's side or the demarcation point to prevent, impede, or in any way interfere with the subscriber's right to use his or her home wiring to receive an alternative service. Required incumbent providers to take reasonable steps within their control to ensure that an alternative service provider has access to the home wiring at the demarcation point, and required incumbent and alternative providers to cooperate with each other when the customers switch providers by taking steps to minimize the potential for signal leakage in accordance with Commission regulations, theft of service, and unnecessary disruption of the customer's premises. There's no indication in the 1996 Inside Wiring Order or reconsideration that the Commission anticipated a situation in which an incumbent provider would sell its inside wiring to the MTE owner and lease it back. And that's what they're talking about here. So that's what happened. So they said, they were basically saying that, that these wires could not belong to the provider. So the provider said, okay, well, we'll sell it to the MTE owner, and then we'll lease it back from them on an exclusive basis. And in a sense, we don't own it anymore, but it really is ours to use and nobody else's. It's clear, however, that the Commission was concerned with practices that would make it more difficult for alternative providers to access home wiring so they can replace incumbent providers, as well as with practices by an incumbent provider that could cause disruption to the subscriber by requiring an alternative provider to install new equipment inside the subscriber's premises or otherwise on the subscriber's side of the demarcation point. So one of the things that kind of the chilling effect this could have would be on any let's say, apartment units that have old wiring. So they've just got copper wiring in there, and there could be something where a fiber provider comes into the neighborhood and they're like, you know what, we could hook up this building to fiber, and we can certainly take the fiber to the curb, but we don't want to go ahead and have the expense of rewiring this whole building, because if we do that, then after we do that, any other operator can come in and use all of the fiber that we put within that building, or let's say it's Ethernet cable, whatever we're doing, whatever kind of wiring we're putting in that building, then somebody else can come in and use that. So that does kind of have that chilling effect, where a service provider that, again, is maybe blanketing an area with fiber, they get to that building and it's like, well, we're going to go to the curb, but that's it. We'll have to figure out, we'd like to serve that building, and maybe we'll find a way to do it, but we're not going to certainly rewire the building. And that's a very expensive thing to do anyway. So I'll post here in the comments section a couple of videos that I did regarding something called GHN, or G.HN. It's something that allows a service provider to ride along the existing wire in a building. It could be coax, it could be twisted pair. You can even do it over power lines, although for longer distances, generally you're going to be doing it over like the telephone line. But you can get gigabit speeds doing that using GHN, and that way you can have equipment installed outside, and you can have multiple providers that are riding those same telephone lines in the building. You don't have to rewire the building. You don't have to worry about who owns the wiring. So I will post something about that. That's a very interesting option for any service provider that wants to provide broadband in a building without having to do any rewiring. Because again, rewiring is expensive. You have to do it all at once, but with G.HN, you can do it one subscriber at a time and not have to worry about doing the whole building. It all takes place over the current inside wiring. The Commission noted it as an example that the incumbent should give the alternative provider access to the lockbox if necessary, so the alternative provider can connect to the home wiring. So that's something that was required. But with the sale and leaseback, it's almost like that not being in place. A sale and leaseback arrangement is an arrangement where an incumbent provider conveys its inside wiring, typically both home and home run wiring. Home would be within the apartment itself. Home run would be from some central point to the apartment, to a residential MTE owner, and then leases it back on an exclusive basis. And that's kind of the key, is they're leasing it back on an exclusive basis, meaning nobody else can use it. We reach our decision based on two separate independent bases. First, an incumbent provider's participation in a sale and leaseback arrangement violates its obligation to take reasonable steps within its control to ensure that an alternative service provider has access to the home wiring at the demarcation point following a subscriber's voluntary termination of service. Second, such arrangements contravene the prohibition on providers from using any ownership interest they may have in property located on the subscriber's side of the demarcation point to interfere with the subscriber's right to use its home wiring to receive an alternative service following a subscriber's voluntary termination of service. So basically, it's kind of circumventing the rules they had in place on inside wiring. Let's see, there's something else in here, and I'm almost done. I think that might be it, actually. I might be done. I think that's it. Yeah, the rest is just more FCC stuff. So, well, there you go. So that's it. So it's interesting that they've done this now. I think this goes kind of hand in hand with what they're trying to do with all of the broadband infrastructure dollars that are coming out, including that which is pending for the bipartisan infrastructure bill and all the broadband money from that. They're wanting to make sure that these MDUs and MTEs can get good broadband access, and that there's no impediment there, because as they said in kind of their preamble there, a lot of folks live in apartments. So if you're not taking that into account, even though a particular service area may be served, but if you've only got one provider that can provide access in that building, they're trying to make sure that you can have multiple ones in there to provide some competition, to keep prices down, to make sure that people can get the best service available. All right, as I said, I'll go ahead and post the links to the two videos about GHN if you are interested, a broadband provider interested in about how you can do that, use that inside wiring. I'll also post a link to this report and order if you want to read through the whole thing. And that's it for today. So thanks for joining me for Broadband Deployment News, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.